Okay, and welcome and thank you everyone for coming to our event virtually today. My name is Dong Hee. I'm the communication officer for the Center for Khmer Study, and also today I'm the moderator. Very nice seeing you all virtually today. បាទអញ្ចឹងលោកអ្នកដែលកំពុងតែអញ្ជើញចូលរួមលោកអ្នកកំពុងតែចូលរួមនៅក្នុងកម្មវិធីធ្វើបទបង្ហាញជាសាធារណៈរបស់មជ្ឈមណ្ឌលខេមរៈសិក្សាហើយនៅក្នុងកម្មវិធីនេះដែរយើងខ្ញុំនឹងរៀបចំជូនជាពីរភាសាគឺភាសាខ្មែរនិងភាសាអង់គ្លេសដែលនៅពេលដែលចាប់ផ្ដើមការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញនឹងមានអ្នកបកប្រែដែលគាត់នឹងបកប្រែជាភាសាខ្មែរជូនលោកអ្នកផងដែរ Everyone, as we get started, I would like to invite you all to introduce yourself, writing down your name and your organization or your location in the chat box. And while you are introducing yourself, I introduce you the Center for Khmer Study. So the Center for Khmer Study, also known as CKS, is a non-governmental and non-profit organization. We facilitate research, knowledge sharing, and insight on topics related to Cambodia's social, economic, and cultural development. CKS aims to strengthen research and teaching capacity in the social science and humanity as they relate to Cambodia. So every year, CKS provides fellowship grant to PhD postdoctoral candidates for doing research in Cambodia through our senior and dissertation research fellowship program. The application for these two programs in 2021 are just recently closed, but I am excited to inform you that we are now opening application for other two programs, the Junior Resident Fellowship Program and the Khmer Language and Culture Program. If you are interested in coming to Cambodia, learning about Khmer culture and history, you are invited to apply. And you can also find out more information and the detailed application on our website, www.khmerstudy.org. So now I would like to welcome our speaker, Dr. Lisa Erinson, to join us. Good morning, Dr. Lisa. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well.
Thank you very much. Can you introduce yourself to our attendees, please?
Sure. I'm a social anthropologist, and I've been doing research on Kulen Mountain for the last 5 years. And I was very pleased to be able to do a bit more research this summer, and I'll be talking about my preliminary findings this morning.
Also today we have Bong Supiat joining us as an interpreter. Bong Supiat, can you briefly introduce yourself to our attendees?
Good morning, everyone from Cambodia anyway. My name is Sun Supiat. I am a freelancer and I also an interpreter and a translator for a part-time. And I also a businesswoman. I have a sewing workshop in Siem Reap, and I have been working as a research study assistant in the various institute. I joined the research with Dr. Lisa on Kulen Mountain Study Research in the past November in 2019 and in October 2020. So this is my summary. So now I will translate to my Cambodian fellow. So សួស្តីអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាជំរាបសួរនាងខ្ញុំឈ្មោះសុនសុភ័ក្រជាអ្នកបកប្រែឯករាជ្យហើយខ្ញុំក៏ជាសហគ្រិននារីម្នាក់ដែលមានគម្រោងដេរនៅក្នុងខេត្តសៀមរាបផងដែរហើយក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះខ្ញុំចូលរួមនៅក្នុងការបកប្រែជួយអ្នកដុកទ័រលោកស្រីលីសាក្នុងការបកប្រែរបស់គាត់ដោយខ្ញុំបានមានបទពិសោធន៍ក្នុងការធ្វើការងារក្នុងការចុះកម្មសិក្សាជាមួយនឹងលីសាអស់រយៈពេល2ដងគឺលើកទី1នៅក្នុងខែខែ11នៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2019និងលើកទី2នៅក្នុងខែ10នៅឆ្នាំ2020ដែលយើងបានធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវនៅលើភ្នំគូលែនចាបងអាចបកប្រែអំពីអ្នកគ្រូលីសាទៅ
Please បង
ចាហ្នឹងហើយអញ្ចឹងអំបញ្ញមិញបណ្ឌិតលីសាគាត់បាននិយាយរៀបរាប់អំពីប្រវត្តិគាត់ខ្លីៗអញ្ចឹងបងសូមបកប្រែឲ្យបន្តិចណាចាអញ្ចឹងបណ្ឌិតលីសាអារិនសាគឺជាពិទូសង្គមសាស្ត្រវិទ្យាមកពីសាកលវិទ្យាល័យប្រ៊ុយណេ ហើយអ្នកគ្រូគាត់ធ្លាប់បានធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវនៅលើភ្នំKulenហ្នឹងអស់រយៈពេល5ឆ្នាំមកហើយអញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះLisa គាត់នឹងនិយាយអំពីបទពិសោធន៍ក៏ដូចជាអ្វីរបស់កំហុសដែលគាត់បានធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវនៅទីនោះយកមកចែករំលែកជូនអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នា
All right, thank you, Mom. Dr. Lisa, before you start your presentation, would you mind let us know where are you talking from right now?
I am in a quarantine hotel in Brunei.
Okay, so that means you just go back from Cambodia, right?
Sadly, yes, I just left Cambodia 3 days ago.
Okay, so can we know when was your first time in Cambodia?
1999.
Whoa, in 1999. So can we also know why were you interested in conducting your research in Cambodia and especially in this topic?
Yes, it's been very nice to be able to go back to doing research on traditional religion lately. For the last 6 years, I've been looking at different forms of traditional ecological knowledge, particularly with people in protected areas, the impact of conservation agendas on people in protected areas, their impact on biodiversity, and getting a chance to focus back on people's beliefs and how those things influence how they act in the environment has been a recent turn in my research, and I'm very pleased that CKS granted me the funding to look into that this summer.
អញ្ចឹងការចាប់ផ្ដើមអ្នកគ្រូ Lisa គាត់មានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍តាក់ទងទៅនឹងហេតុអ្វីបានជាគាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍នៅក្នុងការធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវនៅលើក្នុងភ្នំKulenគឺដោយសារតែអ្នកគ្រូចង់ដឹងអំពីវប្បធម៌និងការវប្បធម៌ទូទៅរបស់អ្នករស់នៅលើភ្នំKulenក៏ដូចជាជីវិតរស់នៅរបស់គាត់និងការជំនឿរបស់គាត់ផងដែរហើយអ្នក Lisa គាត់បានមកក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាតាំងពីឆ្នាំ1999មកម្លេះ
Okay, thank you, Mom. I'm not taking any longer of your time, Dr. Lisa, so I give the floor to you. But I want to inform our attendees that this presentation will be divided into 2 sessions. And at the end of each session, you can ask questions by either dropping your question in the chat box or raise your hand and directly ask your question to our speaker. So I would like to invite Dr. Lisa to do her presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sung-hee. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay, is that working? Can you guys see it?
Okay, we see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So thank you, everyone, for coming this morning to our presentation, Romngoap Dai. This is a Khmer phrase that can be translated as to cool the earth. For several years now, often with students from the School for Field Studies, one of our research topics has been the state of resilience of traditional beliefs on the mountain. And our current research from this past summer looked at how Cambodian animism is interpreted and negotiated in terms of the sacred topography or geography of Kulen. Specifically, we looked at how residents navigate a sacred landscape, which may or may not be visible, which they want to farm and live upon. We also looked at what are the risks of these trespasses and how do people resolve conflicts with the spirits. So in this talk, I'm going to be mostly descriptive and not use a lot of academic or theoretical language. So Pat.
ចាអញ្ចឹងគោលបំណងនៃការធ្វើការបទគោលបំណងនៃការស្រាវជ្រាវរបស់យើងនេះគឺការស្រាវជ្រាវរបស់យើងគឺធ្វើអស់រយៈពេលជាច្រើនឆ្នាំណាស់មកហើយដែលយើងបានចងក្រងជាឯកសារស្ដីអំពីជំនឿបែបប្រពៃណីនៅលើភ្នំKulenហើយការស្រាវជ្រាវនេះគឺស្វែងយល់អំពីរបៀបថាតើអបិយជំនឿរបស់ជនជាតិខ្មែរយើងត្រូវបានបកស្រាយនិងមានការតាក់ទងទៅនឹងសន្តានដីដែលគេជឿថាមានភាពស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិនោះដោយរបៀបណាហើយជាក់លាក់ជាងនេះទៅទៀតហ្នឹងថាតើការរស់នៅទីនោះតើយើងអាចធ្វើម្ដេចដឹងថាតំបន់ណាដែលយើងគួរប្រើប្រាស់បានហើយតំបន់ណាទៀតដែលមិនគួរប្រើប្រាស់បានហើយបើសិនជាយើងប្រើប្រាស់ទៅតើនឹងនៅលើតំបន់ដែលមិនអាចប្រើប្រាស់បាននឹងមានរឿងអ្វីកើតឡើងសម្រាប់ពេលនេះដែរ ខ្ញុំនឹងមិនជជែកអំពីពាក្យបច្ចេកទេសពេកទេគឺយើងនឹងប្រើពាក្យអធិប្បាយនៅក្នុងការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះ
So very briefly on our research methods, so Peck and I were able to spend 6 weeks on the Kulen Plateau this summer. We conducted semi-structured interviews of 58 villagers, often in small groups, and we were able to observe 2 spirit rituals that hopefully I'll be speaking about in the second half. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាសម្រាប់វិធីសាស្ត្រក្នុងការធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវនេះគឺយើងធ្វើកិច្ចសម្ភាសជាមួយនឹងអ្នកភូមិចំនួន48នាក់ហើយខ្ញុំនិងសុភ័ក្របានធ្វើការជាមួយគ្នាអស់រយៈពេល6សប្តាហ៍នៅតំបន់ខ្ពង់រាបក្នុងគូលែននោះហើយយើងក៏បានចូលរួមក្នុងការធ្វើការសង្កេតនៅក្នុងកម្មវិធីសាសនាចំនួន2ផងដែរ
Okay, so part 1, and as Sung-hee said, we'll stop for a mini discussion after part 1. I'll be sharing with you our findings about people's spirit beliefs, the places they reside in, and the rules of engagement. So we're just going to skip that one and keep going. So the Kulen Plateau is still one of the most sacred sites in all of Cambodia, and many visitors come to make offerings in the shrines, do pilgrimages to the Breaong Tom Buddha, who is in the photo here on the left. That's a 12th century Buddha, and to visit the sacred carvings in the river.
ចាអញ្ចឹងនេះគឺជារូបភាពមួយនៅក្នុងចំណោមរូបភាពដែលយើងដកស្រង់មកបានហើយយើងគិតថា Kulen Mountain គឺជាតំបន់ខ្ពង់រាបមួយដែលមានជាទីសក្ការៈបូជាដ៏ស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិមួយហើយក៏ជាក្រុងបុរាណចាស់មួយផងដែរហើយតំបន់ខ្ពង់រាបក្នុង Kulen នេះគឺនៅតែបន្តបានចាត់ទុកថាជាតំបន់ដែលមានសក្ការៈដែលជាតំបន់ដែលមានសក្ការៈបូជាដ៏ពិសិដ្ឋបំផុតនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយអ្នកមកទស្សនាជាច្រើនបានមកធ្វើបុណ្យធ្វើការបូជានៅតាមទីសក្ការៈនានានៅលើព្រំហើយក៏ដូចជាធ្វើធម្មយាត្រាបូជាចំពោះព្រះពុទ្ធរូបព្រះអង្គនៅព្រះអង្គធំនិងដើម្បីទស្សនាចម្លាក់ពិសិដ្ឋផ្សេងៗនៅតាមនៅក្នុងទន្លេផងដែរ
On top of being a sacred mountain, Kulen was also the site of the first Khmer city, Mahadanparvata, But also, since Angkorian times, the plateau has been populated and continues to be so today. And so you have a cultivated and residential landscape on top of a sacred landscape. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាអញ្ចឹងភ្នំ Kulen គឺជាទីក្រុងដំបូងគេនៅក្នុងមុនសម័យអង្គរដែលមានទីក្រុងបុរាណឈ្មោះថាមហាត្រឹនពាត់ចាគឺជាឈ្មោះក្រុងបុរាណយើងកាលពីដើមហើយនៅលើខ្នងភ្នំតំបន់ខ្ពង់រាបនេះគឺនៅតែមានប្រជាជនមករស់នៅគឺតាំងពីសម័យអង្គរមកម្លេះហើយនៅតែបន្តរហូតដល់សប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃនេះហើយនេះគឺជារូបភាពនៃផែនទីនៃភ្នំ
So it's perhaps not very clear on your screen, but the small yellow circles represent present-day villages, and this large yellow area in the middle is where the ancient city was located.
អញ្ចឹងពណ៌លឿងគឺជាតំបន់ដែលទីក្រុងចាស់មានទីក្រុងចាស់ចា
So one very quick takeaway from our research is that there are many spirits that continue to be known, and some cases venerated and in some cases feared on Kulen Mountain. Over 5 years, we had 3 different student research projects on local beliefs. And then this summer, we were able to do this research in some further villages. So we created a working index of all the spirits people named and their locations and the kind of spirits they are. The only thing I want to draw your attention to in this slide is that what's down here at the bottom in green highlight are spirits that represent the guardian spirits of the villages, which are quite a different category than wild spirit.
ចាអញ្ចឹងអស់រយៈពេល5ឆ្នាំមកហើយដែលនៅក្នុងគម្រោងការស្រាវជ្រាវរបស់យើងហ្នឹងគឺមានការស្រាវជ្រាវនៅតាមតំបន់ជាច្រើនហើយនេះគឺជាតារាងឈ្មោះនៃអ្នកតាដែលមានឈ្មោះនិងទីតាំងរបស់គាត់រស់នៅហើយអ្វីដែលពួកខ្ញុំចង់ឲ្យអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាបដោតនោះគឺមានចំណុចពណ៌បៃតងដែលយើងបានគូសនៅលើទីនេះគឺជាមានន័យថាជាអ្នកតារក្សាភូមិដែលខុសគ្នាពីអ្នកតាព្រៃ
Every village on the mountain has at least one village guardian spirit family. And village guardian spirits are housed in shrines. Villagers make yearly offerings to them and sometimes individual offerings, particularly in cases of illness, or these days, a lot of people make offerings hoping for luck in the lottery.
ចាអញ្ចឹងនេះគឺជារូបភាពមួយរបស់អ្នកតាហើយនៅតាមផ្ទះនីមួយៗគេតែងតែមានព្រះភូមិផ្ទះរបស់អ្នកតាជាធម្មតាប្រជាជនសែនព្រេនជាប្រចាំឆ្នាំឲ្យចូលសន្ធិដ្ឋដែលថាឲ្យអ្នកតាហ្នឹងមកចូលសន្ធិដ្ឋរៀងក្នុងខ្លួនរបស់គាត់ហើយពេលខ្លះគឺសុំដើម្បីជាការសុំប្រទានឬការការពារហើយអ្នកខ្លះទៀតក៏បានប្រើប្រាស់ក្នុងការសែនព្រេនហ្នឹងដើម្បីសុំការព្យាបាលឬក៏អ្នកខ្លះទៀតសុំលេខឆ្នោតក៏មានដែរ
In addition to village guardians, villagers also sometimes encounter spirits who are hosted by mediums and sometimes encounter spirits when they are in the wild or in the forest.
ចានៅពេលដែលនៅពេលខ្លះយើងដឹងថាប្រជាជនខ្លះគាត់មានបទពិសោធន៍ជួបជាមួយនឹងអ្នកតានោះតាមរយៈការបញ្ចូលរូបតាមរយៈអ្នកចូលរូបតែអ្នកខ្លះទៀតក៏បានដឹងបានយល់ពីអ្នកតាហ្នឹងនៅពេលដែលគាត់កំពុងតែនៅក្នុងព្រៃអីជាដើមក៏គាត់ឃើញផ្ទាល់អីចឹង
This slide shows 2 more Nekta shrines that are known. But the kind of spirits we're going to be focusing on today are mostly the kind that are encountered outside of the protection of the village.
ចានេះគឺជារូបភាពមួយនៃរោងអ្នកតានៅតាមភូមិហើយសម្រាប់ការអធិប្បាយក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះក៏យើងចែកអំពីអ្នកតាដែលគាត់រស់នៅមិននៅក្នុងភូមិទេគឺគាត់រស់នៅកន្លែងផ្សេងទៀត
So in our research about sacred geography, boundaries were key to this concept of the sacred. Sacred and secular boundaries cannot intersect or overlap. So things like farm boundaries and rice cultivation should not knock against or bisect sacred objects or locations. And what you see in this diagram, which is drawn by a villager, the larger circle represents the boundary of a farm. The smaller circle represents the problems that can occur if a termite mound is bisected by a farm boundary. The straight line represents what happens if the farm is accidentally over a spirit road.
ចាអញ្ចឹងនៅលើភ្នំមានលក្ខណៈស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិមួយចំនួនដែលតាក់ទងទៅនឹងព្រំដីគិតថាព្រំដីគឺជាកន្លែងដែលមានអាចមានកន្លែងដែលមានអ្នកតាឬក៏ភាពស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិអ្វីមួយដែលនៅទីនោះហើយនៅពេលដែលយើងសាងសង់ព្រំដីយើងមិនអាចឲ្យមានការព្រំដែនកាត់គ្នារវាងលោកីនិងតាមបែបវិញ្ញាណនោះទេអញ្ចឹងនៅពេលណាដែលយើងធ្វើកងគ្នាឬក៏យើងជន់គ្នាវាអាចធ្វើឲ្យមានការប៉ះពាល់
So traditionally, agriculture on the Kulen plateau was swidden, which means rotating agriculture, where people rotate farms in a loop, leaving the land behind as fallows to grow back and then returning to it after a number of years. But in addition to having fallows, there's always been people who have needed to cut forest for new farms and have continued to clear the plateau, both in the old times continuing against national park policies unto today.
ចឹងការធ្វើកសិកម្មមួយចំនួននៅលើភ្នំហ្នឹងគឺមាននៅតែមានជាលក្ខណៈប្រពៃណីនៅឡើយទេដោយពួកគាត់ធ្វើស្រែជារយៈវិលជុំបានន័យថាគាត់ធ្វើនៅក្នុងដីតំបន់មួយបន្ទាប់មកឆ្នាំក្រោយគឺគាត់ធ្វើនៅក្នុងដីតំបន់មួយទៀតអញ្ចឹងគាត់ធ្វើរបៀបនេះអស់រយៈពេលជាច្រើនឆ្នាំមកហើយពេលខ្លះនៅពេលដែលគាត់ចង់ធ្វើដីថ្មីនៅលើដីថ្មីគាត់ទាមទារឲ្យមានការរៀនដីថ្មីមានការរៀនឈើដើម្បីយកដីថ្មីនោះអញ្ចឹងពេលខ្លះពេលគាត់រៀនយកដីថ្មីហ្នឹងវាធ្វើឲ្យប៉ះពាល់នៅក្នុងការអភិរក្ស
So how do you know if the land you're clearing is inhabited by spirits or is a sacred space? Some people will cut a small bit of the forest and then they will wait, go home and sleep for the night and wait for a dream or an omen. Now, good omens in the dream included the birth of a healthy baby or catching a live fish. These were good signs that the land would be blessed by the spirits. Bad omens included losing your teeth, a broken stove, a charcoal stove, a jangkaran, a house fire, or a drowning. Now, these are very personal ways of interpreting if the land was sacred or forbidden. However, it should be noted that many people no longer use these practices.
អញ្ចឹងវិធីសាស្ត្រក្នុងការដឹងថាដីណាមានទោសដីណាដែលមិនមានទោសក្នុងការឲ្យគាត់អាចកាប់បានគឺវិធីសាស្ត្រមួយដែលគាត់ប្រើគឺពួកគាត់កាប់ដើមឈើដែលតូចៗឬក៏ដើមឈើដែលខ្ចីមកដើមពីដើមសិនបន្ទាប់មកគាត់ត្រឡប់ទៅផ្ទះដើម្បីគេងនៅពេលដែលគាត់គេងគាត់ព្រឹកឡើងភ្ញាក់ពីគេងគាត់នឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមកាត់យកសពរបស់គាត់អញ្ចឹងក្នុងករណីដែលយកសពរបស់គាត់នឹងមានន័យមានអត្ថន័យរបស់គេអញ្ចឹងក្នុងករណីដែលយកសពល្អបានន័យថាគឺជាការយកសពមួយដែលឃើញដូចជាមានក្មេងកាត់កូនមកដែលមានភាពធំធាត់ដែលធ្លោះស្អាតមានសុខភាពល្អអីចឹងទៅអញ្ចឹងមានន័យថាដីហ្នឹងគាត់អាចទៅកាប់បន្តបានដើម្បីរៀនធ្វើជាដីចម្ការប៉ុន្តែក្នុងករណីដែលគាត់យកសពសុបិនដែលយកសពល្អដែលមិនអាចឲ្យគាត់បន្តការកាប់រៀនដីបាននោះគឺដូចជាយកសពឃើញដូចជាបាក់ធ្មេញបាក់ចង្ក្រានឆេះផ្ទះអីជាដើមចាអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំគ្រាន់តែចង់បញ្ជាក់ថាវិធីនេះគឺមិនមែនប្រើគ្រប់គ្នាទេគឺពេលខ្លះមានអ្នកខ្លះទេដែលនៅប្រើ
What a lot of people do is they simply cut a farm and then they wait to see if there's any negative consequences. However, that said, there are certain categories of objects and places that know to be careful of or avoid. And there was very, very wide consensus in the 58 people we spoke to about what categories of mountain are considered sacred. So this first slide is going to talk about natural objects. So termite mounds in particular it is forbidden to farm up across, to have a farm boundary bisecting a termite mound. Another issue is if a tall tree is cut, the stump itself may become a residence for the spirits. Streams are considered places that you should not bisect with a fence. You can have a farm that goes along the stream, but you can't cut across it. Particularly the mouth of the stream or the spring head is a sacred spot that should not be farmed upon. Another category are cliffs, which are often considered to be the residence of spirits, and a particular category of spiritual being called the Neksat Jang. If a tree falls and crosses the boundary of your farm, that is also an issue that needs to be resolved. And then this last category is a sort of mysterious category called the Sampau Loan. It was defined variously by different villagers. Probably the most common definition was a long, low ridge of land that ends in a point. To be on the ridge, up against the ridge, or at the end of the ridge was considered forbidden. But some elders said that the Sampau Luan represents a place where a spring vanishes under the rocks, goes to the ground, and then comes back up again later. Both where the water vanishes and comes back up are sacred spaces that should not be cultivated or disturbed. Go ahead, So.
Yeah. So anyway, your speech was interrupt a little bit, but I will try my best. Okay. អញ្ចឹង ចា no problem អញ្ចឹងនៅពេលដែលពេលខ្លះយើងមើលដីនៅតាមរយៈគាត់មើលដីនៅតាមរយៈការយកសពយកសុបិនអញ្ចឹងឲ្យពេលក្នុងយកសពខ្លះគាត់ឲ្យដឹងថាដីខ្លះគាត់អាចប្រើទៅធ្វើទៅមានផលប៉ុន្តែមានការមើលដីមួយចំនួនផ្សេងទៀតដែលគាត់អាចមើលទៅលើវត្ថុដូចជាវត្ថុដែលនៅជុំវិញដីរបស់គាត់នឹងដូចជាកណ្ដៀដំបូកគល់ឈើអូជ្រោះដើមឈើដែលបាក់ហើយឬក៏អីផ្សេងទៀតដែលមានតំបន់មួយចំនួនទៀតដែលប្រជាជននៅទីនោះគាត់មើលឃើញគាត់យល់ដឹងថាវាជាតំបន់ដែលគួរពិចារណាប្រជាជនដែលក្នុងចំណោមប្រជាជនទាំង58គ្រួអ្នកហ្នឹងគឺគាត់និយាយថានៅពេលដែលយើងធ្វើចំការឬក៏ធ្វើដីនៅលើដី ដែលមានទឹកអូរពិសេសជាងគេគេហៅថាអ្នកក្បាលទឹកអាចវាប៉ះពាល់ដល់តំបន់ដែលមានអ្នកសច្ចាំងរស់នៅជាដើមហើយក៏មានដីមួយចំនួនទៀតគឺជាដីដែលគេហៅថាដីសំពៅលូនដីសំពៅលូនហ្នឹងវាមានលក្ខណៈដូចជាទួលវែងមួយដែលយើងមើលទៅឃើញដីរៀងមានទួលប៉ុន្តែវាសណ្ដូកវែងហើយដីមួយចំនួនទៀតដែលមានដីដូចជាទឹកស្ទឹងឬក៏អូរដែលទើបតែរីងហើយឬក៏អាចមានទឹកអីមកវិញនឹងបានហ្នឹងអាហ្នឹងក៏គេចាត់ទុកថាជាដីមួយដែលអាចមានលក្ខណៈជាស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិដែរ
Another category are things from the past. One of the reasons that cliffs are often sacred in caves is because there's many Angkorian era inscriptions, like in the photo here. This cave was used as shelter by villagers during the Civil War from bombing, but is also a place where people make offerings. I don't know if you can see, there's the very bottom of the cave here is some offerings made to the spirits are considered to protect ancient inscriptions. Another category was that of ancient roads, plauboran. Whether these were roads that the people from the Angkorian time had used, or in fact were considered roads that the spirits had been using for many centuries, it was absolutely forbidden to cultivate or cut across these ancient roads. Sometimes these roads are visible to human eyes and traces were left. At other times they're not, and spiritual specialists had to come and diagnose that the ancient roads were there. Another very interesting category in terms of the spirit world that was mentioned by some villagers was this idea of invisible canals, that the spirits have canals that we cannot see in the landscape, and that they float down them in sampaos, which is like a word for a traditional Chinese junk. Also, it was forbidden to farm over or cultivate or build a house over any ancient remains or tombs. All of these categories were protected by the spirit world. Go ahead, so.
ចាអញ្ចឹងនៅពេលដែលដីដែលយើងបានបកស្រាយពីមុនមកហ្នឹងគឺបើថាមានសន្តានដីមួយចំនួនដែលយើងគិតថាជាដីដែលស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិមិនអាចធ្វើលើវាបានឬក៏កាត់លើវាបានឬក៏ធ្វើរបងលើវាបានហើយរូបភាពនេះគឺជារូបភាពមួយនៅក្នុងនៅលើភ្នំគូលែនដែរគឺជារូបភាពចេញពីរូងភ្នំដែលមានសិលាចារឹកនៅលើនោះឬក៏ជាមានចម្លាក់នៅលើនោះការជឿរបស់ប្រជាជននៅលើភ្នំគឺគេថានៅលើថ្មដែលមានចម្លាក់ឬក៏មានសិលាចារឹកគឺតែងតែមានអ្នកតាឬក៏អ្នកឬក៏មានអ្វីដែលនៅការពារអញ្ចឹងជាធម្មតាពួកគាត់នឹងមិនទៅធ្វើការដាំដុះឬក៏ធ្វើការកាប់គាស់នៅតំបន់ចិត្តភ្នំឬក៏នៅចិត្តរូងភ្នំនោះទេហើយនៅក្នុងសម័យសង្គ្រាមប្រជាជនមួយចំនួនបានប្រើរូងភ្នំនោះសម្រាប់គាត់ពួនក្នុងសង្គ្រាមហើយអ្វីដែលអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាឃើញនៅខាងក្រោមរូបថ្មមួយប្រហែលជាពិបាកមើលបន្តិចព្រោះខ្ញុំអត់អាចចម្អល់បានហ្នឹងវាមានជាការសែនព្រេនរបស់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋដែលគាត់យកសំណែនទៅសែនថ្វាយនៅទីនោះមួយទៀតគឺចង់និយាយអំពីផ្លូវបុរាណឬក៏ផ្លូវចាស់ដែលអ្នកប្រជាជននៅលើភ្នំនោះជឿថាផ្លូវបុរាណឬក៏ផ្លូវចាស់គឺជាផ្លូវដែលត្រូវបានប្រជាជនឬក៏មនុស្សតាំងពីសម័យពីដើមតាំងពីសម័យបុរាណតាំងពីសម័យអង្គរត្រូវបានប្រើប្រាស់ហើយក៏គេចាត់ទុកថាជាផ្លូវបុរាណដែលពេលខ្លះមើលឃើញពេលខ្លះមើលមិនឃើញហើយក៏វាមានភាពស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិផងដែរ
So how do you know if you've trespassed on sacred land? Quite often residents believe that the spirits would actually send illness to people who had committed these trespasses. Now, not always, but the physical signs of a spirit-caused illness often involve a sensation called jokbua, which is like a twisting, gripping sensation in the belly. Another way that these illnesses were diagnosed is illnesses that did not respond well to biomedical treatment. In some cases, villagers said that staff at hospitals would actually recommend they go home and consult spirit specialists if patients were not responding to treatment. Within the village itself, diagnosing these illnesses is actually quite a complex process that may call for a number of different ritual specialists. And I've put on the slide here the 3 most common people who play that role on Kulen. Quite often a diviner will do the initial diagnosis. That is always a woman using objects to divine whether the spirits are involved or not. A medium may also be called in who may be asked to host the spirit and find out more about the illness and what to do to solve it. And quite often to resolve the problem after the diagnosis, a kind of Cambodian ritual specialist called a Kru Sada, who is a healer who specializes in chanting and blowing while whispering Pali incantations over the patient, will be called in. We'll talk more about that in the second half of this presentation. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាចំពោះថាតើប្រជាពលរដ្ឋនៅលើភ្នំគាត់ដឹងថាដីណាមួយដែលមានទោសឬក៏មិនមានទោសហើយបើសិនជាមានតើធ្វើមិនបានដឹងអញ្ចឹងគឺភាគច្រើនប្រជាជនដែលគាត់ធ្វើដីហើយឬក៏ធ្វើចំការហើយនៅលើដីមានទោសដែលមានទំនាស់នោះគឺភាគច្រើនគាត់ដែលគាត់និយាយមកគឺគាត់ថាគាត់មានជំងឺចុកពោះគឺថាចុកពោះមានមួលមានអីចឹងទៅហើយភាគច្រើនជំងឺដែលគេព្យាបាលបានដូចជានៅតាមដូចជាជំងឺដែលយើងអាចព្យាបាលបានតាមវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រណាអញ្ចឹងជាជំងឺមួយដែលជាធម្មតាប៉ុន្តែបើជំងឺនោះព្យាបាលមិនបានតាមបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រទេគឺគាត់នឹងគិតថាវាជាជំងឺដែលបណ្ដាលមកពីទំនាស់ដីហើយអញ្ចឹងមានន័យថាមានអ្នកតាធ្វើទុកគាត់ហើយអញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងការធ្វើនៅក្នុងការព្យាបាលនៅពេលដែលមានទំនាស់ដីបែបហ្នឹងគឺចាគឺគេប្រើអ្នកជំនាញជាច្រើនក្នុងការព្យាបាលដូចជាអ្នកខ្លះក៏ប្រើគ្រូបូលមានគ្រូស្ដោះមានគ្រូចូលរូបអីជាដើមហើយភាគច្រើនអ្នកនៅពេលដែលមានការព្យាបាលណាមួយគឺយើងឃើញសិតតែមានអ្នកដែលគាត់ជាស្ត្រីដែលគាត់មកជួយជ្រោមជ្រែងណាចានៅក្នុងការធ្វើពិធីសាសនាបែបនោះចា
So we don't have time for this slide, but I'll just very briefly mention that it's not only illness that the spirit can cause, but sometimes also disasters or accidents. And there's a current road project going on the mountain. There have been some mechanical failures and some accidents. These are interpreted as having been caused by the builders and travelers just under the earth. Go ahead, So.
Yeah, អញ្ចឹងវាមិនមែនមានតែអ្នកតាទេដែលធ្វើឲ្យមនុស្សនៅក្នុងឈឺច្រើនអញ្ចឹងក៏មានបច្ច័យមួយចំនួនដែរដែលធ្វើឲ្យមនុស្សនៅទីនោះមានការឈឺឬក៏មានជួបគ្រោះដូចជាការឥឡូវហ្នឹងគឺមានការរីកចម្រើននៅក្នុងបច្ចេកវិទ្យាអញ្ចឹងក៏មានបញ្ហាមួយចំនួនដែរដូចជាតាក់ទងទៅនឹងការគ្រោះថ្នាក់ចរាចរណ៍គឺការគ្រោះថ្នាក់ឬក៏ការធ្លាក់គ្រឿងយន្តអីផ្សេងជាដើមដែលកើតមានឡើងនៅលើភ្នំនោះ
So we're going to stop here for our first discussion, and we're happy to take your questions from the audience. We'd also be interested in asking those of you who are Cambodians who are listening, if in the lowlands where you live, there are similar ideas about sacred objects like the termite mounds and the ancient roads. Because many people on the mountain told us that there's more beliefs about these things and there's more of these things up there than down below. But we are curious about overlaps or differences in these beliefs.
ឥឡូវនេះពួកយើងចង់ចូលទៅវគ្គពិភាក្សាបន្តិចតាក់ទងទៅនឹងការចង់ដឹងរបស់ពួកយើងដែរពីព្រោះនៅលើភ្នំយើងដឹងហើយថាមានវត្ថុខ្លះឬក៏អ្វីបច្ច័យខ្លះដែលធ្វើឲ្យយើងមិនអាចប្រើប្រាស់ដីបានឲ្យធ្វើឲ្យយើងឈឺបានអញ្ចឹងសំណួរពួកយើងចង់សួរថាតើនៅភូមិកំណើតរបស់អ្នកដែលនៅក្នុងតំបន់ទំនាបនោះមានជំនឿលើវត្ថុដូចជាដំបូកកណ្ដៀឬក៏កន្លែងទីតាំងណាមួយផ្សេងដែលអ្នកធ្លាប់ដឹងថាមានភាពស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិដូចនៅអ្នកលើភ្នំដែរអត់ព្រោះអីនៅខាងអ្នកយើងធ្លាប់បានគេប្រាប់ថាការជឿលើទាំងអស់នោះវាមិនដូចគ្នាឬក៏មានភាពស្រដៀងគ្នាដែរដែលអ្នកនៅខាងក្រោមណាចាគិតថាមើលទៅវាដូចគ្នាឬក៏មានភាពស្រដៀងគ្នាឬក៏មានភាពផ្សេងគ្នា
So I'm going to turn this part over to Sungi and stop sharing my screen until the second part.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Lisa, for your presentation. And now, all attendees, if you have any question, please drop your question in the chat box. And for those who are watching us on Facebook Live, you can also comment your question. And for our attendees on Zoom, you can also raise up your hand if you want to talk or you want to ask your question directly to our speakers. Okay, so we got one question. How did new arrival interact with spirit differently from those up there since the mine were here or who have a longer history prior to 1975? Did you get the
Yes,
question?
thank you. That's a very interesting question. Talking about people going into mined areas is a whole other area of study that I haven't got much time to speak about right now. But I mean, perhaps there's a similarity in mined landscapes and spirit landscapes in that new arrivals to the mountain have to rely upon the knowledge and experiences of older arrivals. Because the plateau of Kulen is so heavily landmined, and because it has so many sacred sites, people who married in or have moved into the villages are reliant on people who have been there longer. Just from my personal observation of doing research on the mountain for 5 years, most lowlanders who've moved up to the mountain are very well integrated into the villages and into the belief systems of the villages. A lot of the newcomers have literally married into families. There's not a lot of families that have moved in who have no connection to the villages. There are a few, but some of the Khmer families in the lowlands who've moved in, who have no connection to folks on the mountain, they do only business and they don't go into the forest because they recognize it as a somewhat mysterious and frightening place.
Okay, so Dr. Lisa wants our attendee raising up her hand fastly, so I would like to invite her to ask the question, please.
Good morning, Dr. Lisa. So today I want to first I want to talk about the dream element. So the losing teeth is shared with the lowlands, and the termite noun is shared with the with the lowland. Thank you so much for very fascinating presentations. I'm so happy that the concept of Sampaloon is come up in your presentation, because I have been looking at the map and see that name like in Battambang. I'm from Battambang, and my field work is actually in Sampaloon. Has always like wondered what it means, and they also like village name Sampaloon. In your presentation, you explain, but I don't really clearly understand what does it mean. Could you explain more? And can the Sampaloon be considered as a spirit path? You was like explaining about this like stream that disappear and come back, but I don't really understand clearly what it.
Thank you. That is an excellent set of questions. It's a little bit of a mysterious category for us too, next Rai. Only like quite a few people would mention it, but only a few of the elders were able to clearly give us a definition of what they thought it was. The most common answer was that it's connected to a ridge of land. It wasn't clear if this is considered a place where spirits live or spirits travel. Maybe Sopiak can expand on that in Khmer, but in my understanding, the idea of it being a place where water goes underground was only mentioned by one or two. I don't know, but I suspect it might be connected to the idea of the invisible spirit canals that have some po on them. Pat, can you translate and maybe add your interpretation?
អញ្ចឹងហ្នឹងហើយអញ្ចឹងបងស្រីគាត់សួរតាក់ទងអំពីដីសំពៅលូនតាក់ទងនឹងដីសំពៅលូនហ្នឹងពួកយើងក៏ពិបាកក្នុងការបកស្រាយដែរនៅពេលដែលពួកយើងបានសួរអ្នកភូមិនៅទីនោះគឺភាគច្រើនគាត់និយាយផ្សេងគ្នាគឺការបកស្រាយរបស់គាត់និយាយផ្សេងគ្នាហាក់អត់សូវច្បាស់អញ្ចឹងដីសំពៅលូនអ្នកខ្លះគាត់និយាយថាជាដីទួលវែងដែលសណ្ដូកទៅយើងឃើញហើយដែលអាចឲ្យយើងមើលដឹង ប៉ុន្តែអ្នកខ្លះទៀតដីសំពៅលូនគាត់ថា មើលអត់ឃើញទេគឺជាដីដែលជាតំបន់បន្លាយទឹកកាលពីមុនដែលវាបានស្រកហើយជាបន្លាយទឹកហ្នឹងគឺជាបន្លាយទឹកដែលមានអ្នកតាបសំពៅកាត់ទៀតអញ្ចឹងអ្នកខ្លះគាត់និយាយចឹងហើយអ្នកខ្លះគាត់ថាគាត់ឃើញដីអញ្ចឹងការបកស្រាយរបស់អ្នកភូមិនៅទីនោះគឺអត់ដូចគ្នាអញ្ចឹងពួកយើងពិបាកក្នុងការបកស្រាយដែរថាតើដីសំពៅលូនគឺជាដីបែបម៉េចឲ្យពិតប្រាកដប៉ុន្តែគាត់ក៏បានបកស្រាយដែរថាបើសិនជាមានដីសំពៅលូនគឺជាដីគ្រោះថ្នាក់តែគាត់មិនអាចធ្វើផ្ទះឬក៏សង់ព្រំដីឬក៏ដាំនៅលើដីសំពៅលូនបានទេហើយតាក់ទងទៅនឹងទឹកដែលដូចជាទឹកអូដែលដីដែលជាទឹកអូកាលពីមុនណាហើយត្រូវបានរីងហើយហ្នឹងក៏មានអ្នកខ្លះគាត់និយាយពីអាហ្នឹងដែរមានអ្នកខ្លះទៀតគាត់ថាដីសំពៅលូនដែរប៉ុន្តែលក្ខណៈទឹកដែលហូរហើយស្រាប់តែហូរចូលក្នុងដីបាត់ដែលយើងមើលឃើញអត់ឃើញទឹកទៀតណាអាហ្នឹងក៏ជាតំបន់មួយដែលគាត់គិតថាជាតំបន់គ្រោះថ្នាក់ហើយក៏ជាដីសំពៅលូនដែរចាអញ្ចឹងអ្នកខ្ញុំជាមួយនឹងអ្នកគ្រូអត់ដឹងបកស្រាយច្បាស់មិនដែរព្រោះដោយសារតែយើងអត់វានៅសពិកសពើដែរ
ចានឹងយើងសង្ស័យថាប្រហែលពាក្យសំពៅលឿងតាក់ទងជាមួយពាក្យពេលមនុស្សគេនិយាយអំពីផ្លូវទឹកដូចគេថាផ្លូវទឹកមានន័យផ្លូវដែលដក Canal របស់អ្នកតានិងអ្នកតាគេជីក្នុងសំពៅខាងលើផ្លូវទឹកប៉ុន្តែផ្លូវទឹកនេះផ្លូវយើងអ្នកមនុស្សនោះយើងមើលផ្លូវទឹកអត់បាននេះដូចផ្លូវ invisible ចា
សំពៅលូនដែលគាត់អ្នកគ្រូនិយាយវិញហ្នឹងគឺយើងមើលអត់ឃើញហ្មង
Sorry, Sanghi, I was just going to say the question from Dr. Eli Knapp. I think let's wait till the ending discussion and come back to that one. It's a great question. Once we get through how people resolve these conflicts, I can answer that in with a little more accuracy.
Also, we have one more question, Dr. Lisa, from
yes.
Mr. Susan, but I think I want to invite him to ask the question directly because his question is a bit long. Maybe it's easier to understand if he speak up the question or you.
Well, I think people can see it if they open the Q&A. So yes, Susan Smith is a woman. Yes, Susan's asking how much of this knowledge about the spirit world is rare versus how much is like Tomada, where you can find it by watching movies or reading books. That's a very good question. I think the answer is that general beliefs and general ideas about the spirit world are represented in popular culture in movies and books. Although in films, there's a lot of borrowing from Chinese popular culture, particularly when it comes to ideas about ghosts and negative spirits. Khmer films have less about traditional Khmer ideas of positive spirits. But I think what's important with Cambodian animism is to recognize it's extremely specific to place. So the kinds of spirits people respect or worry about in one village can be different from even the next village down the mountain. So I've found when you're doing animism research, it's extremely important to consider it very localized and very specialized. So I don't think that what people believe on the Kulen plateau is necessarily the same as people believe in villages, even at the base of the mountain. It's very specific knowledge. It's non-written, non-canonical knowledge. It's passed down from ancestor to ancestor and therefore varies widely between, even in a given village, there's only a few elders who have very specific knowledge of the spirit world. Most other people in the village will come to those specialists to find out what's happening. They're not able to interpret it without the intervention of a Kru Khmer of one kind or another.
I think the question was about, is it the spirit is like the one in the movie or something? Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
The question is, can you learn about the spirit world? Are these common ideas that are also in movies and books, or are they quite specific ideas?
ចាអញ្ចឹងសំណួរដែលអ្នកចូលរួមគាត់បានសួរទៅបណ្ឌិតលីសាគឺគាត់សួរថាតើអ្នកតាឬក៏វិញ្ញាណដែលយើងនិយាយនៅក្នុងពេលនេះគឺវាស្តៀងគ្នាទៅនឹងអ្វីដែលយើងធ្លាប់មើលក្នុងកុនមើលនៅក្នុងរឿងអីផ្សេងដែរឬក៏អត់អញ្ចឹងណាចាអញ្ចឹងការបោះស្រាយរបស់អ្នកគ្រូទៅកាន់ឆ្លើយតបទៅកាន់សំណួរហ្នឹងគឺ តាក់ទងទៅនឹងអបិយជំនឿរបស់ប្រជាជននៅលើភ្នំគឺមានលក្ខណៈជាក់លាក់ជាងនៅក្នុងដែលយើងអាចនិយាយបានថាជាលក្ខណៈដូចនៅក្នុងរឿងប៉ុន្តែអបិយជំនឿដែលយើងនិយាយអ្នកលើភ្នំនេះគឺគាត់និយាយអំពីការជឿទៅលើអ្នកតារុក្ខរៈអ្នកតាផ្សេងដែលអ្នកនៅលើភ្នំជឿតគ្នាពីចាស់បុរាណមកដែលគាត់ជឿតគ្នាយូរលង់ណាស់មកហើយការជឿនេះអត់បានសរសេរទុកជាឯកសារនៅកន្លែងណាទេដោយសារតែជាជំនឿបែបអរូបីរបស់គាត់ហើយនៅតាមភូមិមួយគាត់ជឿផ្សេងគ្នាលក្ខណៈខុសគ្នាបន្តិចអញ្ចឹងអបិយជំនឿដែលពួកគាត់ប្រជាជនខ្មែរយើងមាននៅលើភ្នំហ្នឹងគឺអាចថាពេលខ្លះគឺមានភាពជាក់លាក់ប៉ុន្តែបើសិនជាយើងចង់សិក្សាអំពីអបិយជំនឿឲ្យជ្រៅគឺយើងត្រូវតែសិក្សានៅតាមតំបន់មួយចាដើម្បីឲ្យដឹងថាតំបន់មួយគាត់មានអបិយជំនឿបែបណាព្រោះដោយសារតែអបិយជំនឿរបស់គាត់គឺមិនដូចគ្នាទេចា
Okay.
សូមសង្ខេបប៉ុណ្ណឹង
Very much. So I would like to end the Q&A session for this session now, and we will have another Q&A session after the second presentation session. So I would like to invite Dr. Lisa to continue the presentation, the second session, please.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so part 2. We only have about 15 minutes, so we'll try to make it tight for our section. This part is about how people solve sacred trespass, how people on the mountain, what they do if they think they've offended the spirits. If the trespass occurs because people have interfered with a sacred place or a sacred site, it turns out that on mountains in particular, a particular kind of ritual specialist, the Kru Sada, the Pali chanter I mentioned earlier, is called in to Romngoap Dai. Excuse me. This phrase means to make cool the earth again. That specialist will come into the place on the land where the person offended the spirits. Did they farm across an ancient grave? Did they make a fence across a stream? Did they cut into or cut across the termite mound? The person who caused the offense has to make an offering on the site of the problem at the farm itself. In some cases, that's all that's required. However, if a person has farmed over a spirit road or an ancient road, the Kru Khmer might ask the spirits to please take a new road to circumvent the boundary of the farm. If they do that, they will indicate a new road by walking along it, or by drawing it, or by placing pieces of termite mound while asking the spirits and chanting in Pali if the spirits will please relocate slightly. But in other cases, if the place is considered too sacred, the ritual specialist feels they have indication from the spirits that they wouldn't take a new way, then farmers might be advised to move their plot of land or pull up the crops that they had planted. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាអញ្ចឹងយើងចូលដល់ផ្នែកទី2នៃការធ្វើបង្ហាញថ្ងៃនេះគឺយើងនិយាយអំពីថាបើសិនជាយើងមានបើសិនជាយើងទាស់ទៅនឹងដីតើយើងត្រូវដោះស្រាយតើយើងត្រូវដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាទំនាស់ហ្នឹងតាមរបៀបណាតាមលក្ខណៈបែបអ្នកលើភ្នំណាចាអញ្ចឹងជាទូទៅតាមការសម្ភាសរបស់យើងគឺការគឺដោះស្រាយទំនាស់របស់គាត់ហ្នឹងគឺគាត់ប្រើដូចជាគ្រូស្ដាស់ដែលខ្ញុំបានបញ្ជាក់មុននឹងអញ្ចឹងគឺមានគ្រូស្ដាស់គ្រូស្ដាស់ដែលគាត់មកមើលដីហើយគាត់នឹងសូត្របាលីដើម្បីហៅព្រលឹងនឹងមកឬក៏ហៅវិញ្ញាណឬក៏ហៅអ្នកតានឹងមកដើម្បីរងាប់ដីអញ្ចឹងពាក្យថារងាប់ដីហ្នឹងគឺមានន័យថាធ្វើឲ្យដីហ្នឹងវាមានភាពត្រជាក់ឡើងវិញហើយធ្វើឲ្យហើយអ្នកដែលគាត់មានជំងឺឬក៏អ្នកដែលទាស់ជាមួយនឹងដីហ្នឹងត្រូវយកសំណែនមកសែននៅក្នុងដីដែលមានទំនាស់នោះប៉ុន្តែប្រសិនបើដីមួយចំនួនដែលសំទោសខ្ញុំបកមកក្រោយបន្តិចអញ្ចឹងមានដីខ្លះដែលធ្វើឡើងនៅលើដីផ្លូវបុរាណដែលយើងបាននិយាយមុនហ្នឹងថាផ្លូវបុរាណឬក៏ផ្លូវចាស់ដែលជាផ្លូវដែលមនុស្សដើរដែលជាផ្លូវដ៏ស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិដែរហ្នឹងពេលខ្លះយើងមើលអត់ឃើញគឺគាត់ធ្វើលើដីចាស់ឬក៏ដីបុរាណហ្នឹង វិធីសាស្ត្រដែលគ្រូគាត់ធ្វើនោះគឺការបើកផ្លូវថ្មីមានន័យថាគ្រូគាត់សូត្របាលីហើយដើរទៅលើផ្លូវថ្មីដែលគាត់ចង់ឲ្យអ្នកតានោះប្រើអញ្ចឹងបែរថាគាត់បង្វែរផ្លូវចាស់ឲ្យទៅអ្នកតាដើរប្រើផ្លូវថ្មីវិញដោយប្រើបាលីហើយបើសិនបើផ្លូវឬក៏បើសិនជាដីទំនាស់នោះมันអាចដោះស្រាយបានទេឬក៏នៅតែបន្តមានទំនាស់អញ្ចឹងគ្រូគាត់នឹងឲ្យអ្នកដែលគាត់ដាំនៅលើឬក៏ធ្វើរបងនៅលើនោះគឺដកបើសិនជាគាត់ដាំស្រូវឬក៏ដាំដំណាំគឺត្រូវដកដំណាំនឹងចេញពីផ្លូវហ្នឹងឬក៏ចេញពីតំបន់ដែលមានទំនាស់ហ្នឹងចាអញ្ចឹងវិធីសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគឺជាវិធីសាស្ត្រដែលពួកគាត់ប្រើក្នុងការដោះទំនាស់ដី
So we're going to talk about the two ceremonies that we were able to observe or participate in to give you two examples of people trying to solve problems of the spirit world. So this photo shows you part of a ritual called, excuse me, a Hao Pralung ceremony. This is a very ancient ceremony that it's recorded in the literature. In my earlier research in Western Battambang, the villages where I lived had actually forgotten the ceremony completely. But Sopiak and I came into Sankailak village one morning in October and found out that people were preparing it. We don't have time to get into this, but very briefly, the ancient concept of Khmer culture and some neighboring cultures is that the pralang or the soul has multiple parts or pieces. And you can lose parts of your soul. They can wander away and become lost. They can be frightened out of you. They can be taken by the spirit world. And in which case a person falls ill until their soul is returned to them. This ceremony was specifically done because the woman, the patient, a female patient in this case, it was considered that she had trespassed upon the spirit's territory, offended the spirit, and the spirit had actually taken one of her souls and kept it. Excuse me. So this woman and two others, sorry, I'm just gonna cough for a second. We're digging for galangal, which is a root similar to turmeric, in a dry marsh during the dry season, and they accidentally trespassed on a wild spirit's territory in the understanding of the village. Now, all three of these women fell ill, but one woman remained ill for over a month. So this ceremony was conducted by ritual specialists to try and persuade the wild spirit to let the woman's soul come home again. Go ahead, Sopiak, and then I'll point out a few things in the photo.
ចាអញ្ចឹងអ្នកនរគ្នាឃើញរូបភាពនៅក្នុង slide ដែលអ្នកគ្រូគាត់បង្ហាញនេះគឺជាបុណ្យសាសនាមួយដែលពួកយើងបានចូលរួមខ្ញុំនិងសុភ័ក្របានចូលរួមគឺបុណ្យសាសនានេះគឺឈ្មោះថាពិធីបុណ្យហៅព្រលឹងគឺជាពិធីសែនព្រេនសម្រាប់ហៅព្រលឹងឲ្យចូលមកក្នុងខ្លួនវិញអញ្ចឹងសម្រាប់ការគិតរបស់អ្នកភូមិនៅលើភ្នំគឺគាត់គិតថាពេលខ្លះនៅពេលដែលមនុស្សយើងបានទៅមានទំនាស់ជាមួយនឹងអ្នកតាឬក៏ទៅលើដីណាមួយដែលមានកំពុងតែមានអ្នកតានៅអាចធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកតានឹងចាប់ព្រលឹងគាត់ទុកឬក៏ពេលខ្លះឬក៏បើសិនជាគាត់អត់មានទៅធ្វើទំនាស់នៅលើដីណាទេព្រលឹងរបស់គាត់ក៏អាចវែងទៅកន្លែងណាមួយអញ្ចឹងទៅដែលធ្វើឲ្យគាត់ឈឺអញ្ចឹងពិធីនេះគឺជាពិធីសែនព្រេនគឺជាពិធីមួយដែលយើងបានចូលរួមហើយរឿងរ៉ាវនៅក្រោយបង្កដែលធ្វើឲ្យមានពិធីសែនព្រេននោះកើតឡើងហ្នឹងគឺដោយសារតែមានស្ត្រីម្នាក់ដែលគាត់ឈឺគាត់ធ្លាក់ខ្លួនឈឺអស់រយៈពេល1ខែបន្ទាប់ពីគាត់បានទៅជីកម្ដេងជាមួយនឹងគ្នាគាត់អ្នកចិត្តខាងពីរអ្នកផ្សេងទៀតអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលពួកគាត់ទៅជីកម្ដេងជាមួយនឹងអ្នកទាំង3ទៅជីកម្ដេងបានទៅជីកលើដីទំនាស់ដែលជាដីរបស់មានអ្នកតានៅហើយនៅពេលដែលជីកនោះបន្ទាប់ពីជីកហើយគឺអ្នកទាំង3ធ្លាក់ខ្លួនឈឺប៉ុន្តែជាអកុសលមានម្នាក់ដែលគាត់ឈឺយូរជាងគេដែលគាត់ឈឺរហូតដល់ទៅ1ខែអញ្ចឹងនៅពេលដែលគាត់ធ្លាក់ខ្លួនឈឺនោះហើយដែលធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកភូមិគាត់ចាប់ផ្ដើមធ្វើពិធីហៅព្រលឹងនេះឡើងដើម្បីឲ្យសុំអង្វរ អ្នកតាឲ្យដោះលែងព្រលឹងគាត់ឲ្យមកចូលក្នុងរាងកាយគាត់វិញ
So I just want to point out the 3 different kinds of ritual practitioners in this picture. This woman here is the village medium. This man here is the Pali chanter. And this woman here, a former traditional midwife, is the village diviner, the woman who uses objects. So one of the very notable aspects of the ritual, sorry, maybe wait till I'm done with this one, Sophia.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay, because it's all just related. One of the things about this ceremony is that about 20 villagers were involved in the ceremony. And as I noted before, there was multiple ritual specialists involved. So what you see in this picture is the Krusada is actually chanting in Pali and blowing to protect the medium before she invites the wild spirit into her body. And diviner, as I showed you in the previous photo, excuse me, is waiting nearby with a bunch of ritual offerings to help persuade the wild spirit to let the woman's soul come home. The woman herself was not even at the ceremony. She was back in the village. The ceremony began at her home, went into the forest, and then returned to her home. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាអញ្ចឹងរូបភាពដែលខ្ញុំបង្ហាញនេះគឺជារូបភាពដែលប្រជាពលរដ្ឋបានប្រមូលផ្ដុំគ្នានៅក្នុងពិធីសាសនាមួយនេះហើយរូបភាពហ្នឹងគឺមានរួមបញ្ចូលទាំងលោកគ្រូស្ដោះអ្នកចូលរូបហើយនិងគ្រូបូលតែគាត់ទាំង3ហ្នឹងបានធ្វើការជាមួយគ្នាដើម្បីធ្វើឲ្យវិធីហៅព្រលឹងនេះបានទទួលជោគជ័យហើយរូបភាពទី2នេះដែលអ្នកនរគ្នាកំពុងឃើញហ្នឹងគឺជាយើងគិតថាតើវាមានភាពស្មុគស្មាញមែនទែននៅក្នុងការធ្វើពិធីហ្នឹងគឺពិធីហ្នឹងគឺមានអ្នកចូលរួមប្រហែលជា20នាក់ហើយមានអ្នកឯកទេសខុសៗគ្នាចូលរួមដែរអ្នកឯកទេសគឺជាអ្នកព្យាបាលមកចូលរួមខុសៗគ្នាដែររូបភាពដែលអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាឃើញបុរសដែលនៅអង្គុយខាងក្រោយខ្នងរបស់ស្ត្រីម្នាក់ដែលគាត់កំពុងសំពះហ្នឹងគឺបុរសហ្នឹងគឺជាគ្រូស្ដោះដែលគាត់កំពុងតែសូត្របាលីដើម្បីស្ដោះទៅអ្នកចូលរូបដើម្បីឲ្យជួយការពារអ្នកចូលរូបនៅក្នុងការហៅអ្នកតាឲ្យចូលរូបហ្នឹងដើម្បីកុំឲ្យមានអ្នកតាផ្សេងឬក៏ព្រលឹងផ្សេងមកចូលគាត់ដែរអញ្ចឹងគាត់ស្ដោះដើម្បីជាការការពារអ្នកចូលរូប
So in this last picture, at this point in the photograph, the medium actually is in the trance. Oh, sorry. And the diviner is laid out. Excuse me, sorry about my throat. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it, but there is a sacred boundary, a sema, that's been made with red thread around the banana. And underneath this banana leaf is actually an image of the sick woman's body made out of rice dough. The red thread stretches through ritual offerings off of the bottom of the mat into the forest. And the red thread was to help the lost soul find its way home, back to the specialist so they could put her soul in grains of rice and return it to her. What's on the screen here in Khmer is actually part of the song. I'm going to play you very briefly, just a few seconds of the song that the medium sang. And Sopek actually translated it into the Khmer language. So we'll just play it very briefly for a minute. Sopek, do you want to translate first?
Yeah, yes. អញ្ចឹងរូបភាពនេះគឺជារូបភាពមួយដែលគ្រូកំពុងតែគ្រូទាំងពីរគាត់កំពុងតែរៀបចំសំណែនតែក្នុងនោះអ្នកនរគ្នាឃើញផ្លឹកចេកមកផ្ទាំងហើយមានតាមពិតនៅពីក្រោមផ្លឹកចេកហ្នឹងមានរូបមួយដែលគេធ្វើណាជាធ្វើអំពីម្សៅអង្ករគេសូនរូបមនុស្សហ្នឹងហើយគឺជារូបតំណាងរបស់មនុស្សស្ត្រីដែលគាត់បាត់ព្រលឹងហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងគេសូនរូបគាត់គេសូនរូបតំណាងដាក់នៅខាងក្រោមផ្លឹកចេកហ្នឹងហើយភ្ជាប់ទៅនឹងមានអំបោះក្រហមមួយដែលគេធ្វើខ្សែវែងទៅខាងទៅចូលព្រៃដើម្បីថាខ្សែក្រហមហ្នឹងគឺជាខ្សែដែលនាំផ្លូវព្រលឹងរបស់ស្ត្រីហ្នឹងត្រឡប់មកវិញចានេះគឺជារូបភាពដែលតកតងទៅនឹងការសំណែនរូបភាពដែលគេរៀបជាសំណែនហ្នឹង
So I'm briefing. Go ahead, sorry.
ចាហើយបន្តិចទៀតខ្ញុំនឹងចាក់សំឡេងពោលច្រៀងរបស់ពួកគាត់នៅពេលដែលគាត់ធ្វើពិធីហ្នឹងដែលសុភ័ក្របានបកប្រែបានសរសេរកត់ត្រាជាភាសាខ្មែររួចហើយប៉ុន្តែខ្ញុំនឹងចាក់ជាសំឡេងឲ្យអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នា
So we'll just play a few seconds of it so you can hear the woman who is singing the song. So an interesting feature of this song is that at different points in the song, all the villagers gather, join in chanting, calling the soul home. This is a very complex ritual. We don't have time to tell you more about it today, although I'm going to write about it in the future. But this is one example of a village ceremony used to try to solve a spiritual trespass. This last one here, which we'll speak about very briefly, as I mentioned in the last slide before the discussion, sometimes economic development and modern technologies cut through these beliefs and these spirit-inhabited places with negative results in the eyes of local people. And for example, the villagers encourage the road company that even the forces of modernity, the road crews, they have to be reconciled with the spiritual forces in the landscapes. Offerings had to be made where there was technological problems. Inversely, these last few slides show where the villagers themselves decided to ask a wild spirit to come out of the forest and become tame and modern on their behalf to become a protector of the new road. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចានេះគឺជាស្លាយមួយទៀតដែលយើងចូលដល់តែលក្ខណៈថាតើនៅពេលដែលមានភាពស្មុគស្មាញជាច្រើននៅក្នុងការប្រើប្រាស់ដីអញ្ចឹងតើយើងធ្វើមិនដើម្បីឲ្យដីមានសុវត្ថិភាពឬក៏ស្វែងរកសុវត្ថិភាពសម្រាប់ជីវិតរស់នៅរបស់យើងអញ្ចឹងនៅលើភ្នំក៏មានការដោយសារតែការអភិវឌ្ឍឬក៏ការអភិវឌ្ឍនឹងតាមបែបទំនើបផ្សេងដែលកំពុងតែកើតមានឡើងនៅលើភ្នំហ្នឹងបានជះឥទ្ធិពលជាអវិជ្ជមានខ្លះដែរទៅជីវិតរស់នៅរបស់អ្នកនៅលើភ្នំហើយអញ្ចឹងហើយធ្វើឲ្យជំនឿអបិយជំនឿរបស់ពួកគាត់ដែលតាក់ទងទៅនឹងការជឿទៅលើវត្ថុស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិផ្សេងហ្នឹងមានការព្រួយបារម្ភព្រោះដោយសារតែមានការរំខានច្រើនទៅតាមរយៈបច្ចេកវិទ្យាផ្សេងដែលកំពុងមានហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងអ្នកភូមិចាប់ផ្ដើមបង្វែកការគិតទៅលើវិញ្ញាណអ្នកតាឲ្យស្ថិតនៅដើម្បីជួយពួកគាត់វិញនៅក្នុងការធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យការសាងសង់ផ្លូវថ្មីឬក៏អ្វីផ្សេងដែលតាក់ទងបច្ចេកវិទ្យាទំនើបហ្នឹងអាចជួយការពារអ្នកភូមិឲ្យវាមានសុវត្ថិភាព
So here's a slide of the medium who's channeling the forest spirit dancing towards the new house. And here's a slide of the shrine. The shrine is called the forest spirit renamed Father's Safety. And the villagers now feel they have a place to go and make local offerings and ask for safety as they travel upon this new road. Can you briefly summarize that, Sophia? And then we'll get to our closing slides.
ចានេះគឺជារូបភាពរបស់ព្រះភូមិមួយដែលគេធ្វើឡើងនៅតាមផ្លូវតាមក្បែរផ្លូវចាជាព្រះភូមិថ្មីដែលគេធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកតាមួយដែលត្រូវបានគេដាក់ឈ្មោះឲ្យថ្មីដែរគឺឈ្មោះថាលោកតាសុកចាដែលបានធ្វើឡើងបន្ទាប់ពីមានគ្រោះថ្នាក់កើតឡើងចា
And this entire ceremony was sadly prompted by the death of 2 villagers in a motorbike accident in January of the new year. Go ahead, Sophia.
ចាពិធីឡើងព្រះភូមិនេះត្រូវបានធ្វើឡើងបន្ទាប់ពីមានគ្រោះថ្នាក់មួយដ៏សោកសៅដែលបានកើតឡើងនៅក្នុងកាលពីខែមករាចា
Okay. So, some closing thoughts. One of the broader questions of my research, which actually Dr. Knapp brought up, is how does this land-based spirituality of the people on the mountain, how does it impact upon their land use? How does it impact upon the forest, the places they clear and the places they build? This is a complicated question, and I'm just going to close with some very few initial thoughts on it. So maybe people can just read the slide and we'll keep going. So here's my few thoughts, which Sophia is going to try to translate for me. Perhaps the most simple takeaway is that the sacred landscape on the plateau cannot be simplistically equated with a protected landscape. The fact that places are sacred does not mean that people do not enter them, convert them for agriculture, or, for example, cut down the trees inside of them. Go ahead, Sophia, and then I'll keep going because it's complicated.
នេះគឺជាចំណុចមួយដែលយើងគិតថាអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាអាចយកទៅគិតបាននៅលើតំបន់ខ្ពង់រាបភ្នំគូលែនហ្នឹងគឺជាតំបន់មួយដែលយើងចាត់ទុកថាជាតំបន់ស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិជាតំបន់ការៈបូជាដែលប៉ុន្តែវានៅតែមិនមែនជាតំបន់ដែលយើងអាចរក្សាបានចាហើយមានអ្នកតាឬក៏វិញ្ញាណអ្នកតាជាច្រើននៅក្នុងតំបន់ហ្នឹងត្រូវបានគេផ្លាស់ប្ដូរទីលំនៅរបស់គាត់ហើយក៏ដូចជាត្រូវបានឲ្យអនុញ្ញាតឲ្យប្រជាជនសុំឲ្យគាត់ធ្វើអីមួយតាមអ្វីដែលមនុស្សចង់ចាមនុស្សសុំគាត់ឲ្យផ្លាស់ប្ដូរទីលំនៅអីជាដើម
Yes, so Sophia actually translated my second point in English. Thank you, Sophia. Is that it's perfect. Many members of the spirit world were considered mobile and open to human invocation. In other words, even if people thought that spirits dwelled, for example, in a large tree, it was considered if you did the right rituals and showed respect, that the spirit, for example, could be asked to leave the tree, after which the tree could be cut down. So the animist beliefs about the spiritual landscape, for example, did not directly discourage deforestation. That's not good news for biodiversity or the people who manage the national park. However, on the other hand, people did have very positive spiritual associations with forests. The idea that spirits gather and dwell in places with many trees and good shade, and the idea of coolness both meant actual weather and temperature, but also this idea of harmony and good relationship between people and the spirit world. So there is a place where spiritual heritage and biodiversity intersect, but it's not a simple one. So Pip, do you want to try to translate that? It's pretty hard, I'm sorry.
Let me try. Thank you so much and apologize for my
No, you're doing great.
Sorry ហ្នឹងហើយអញ្ចឹងចំណុចនេះគឺគាត់ចង់បន្ថែមបន្តិចតកតងទៅនឹងនៅពេលដែលយើងហេតុអីបានយើងថាអញ្ចឹងគឺនៅពេលដែលពេលខ្លះនៅពេលដែលមានដើមឈើធំមួយដែលគេជឿថាមានអ្នកតារស់នៅឬគឺផ្ទះរបស់អ្នកតានោះនៅតែមនុស្សអាចសុំអ្នកតានឹងឲ្យកាត់ហើយសុំឲ្យអ្នកតានឹងផ្លាស់ប្ដូរទីលំនៅទៅកន្លែងផ្សេងបានអញ្ចឹងមានន័យថាទោះបីជាតំបន់ហ្នឹងគឺមានភាពស័ក្តិសិទ្ធិក៏ដោយប៉ុន្តែនៅតែមិនអាចការពារទប់ស្កាត់ការកាប់ព្រៃឈើបានទេហើយប៉ុន្តែមានតាមរយៈការស្រាវជ្រាវរបស់យើងគិតថានៅតែមានកន្លែងខ្លះដែលលោកីហើយនឹងតំបន់នឹងវិញ្ញាណអ្នកតាហ្នឹងនៅតែអាចរស់នៅជាមួយគ្នាបានអញ្ចឹងប៉ុន្តែគ្រាន់តែថាវាពិបាកក្នុងការឲ្យយើងថែរក្សាតំបន់អភិរក្សទាំងនោះភាពជាចំណុចទាំងនោះធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកអភិរក្សតំបន់ជីវសាស្ត្រមួយចំនួនមានការព្រួយបារម្ភបែរថាវាមិនមែនជាព័ត៌មានដែលល្អទេសម្រាប់អ្នកដែលគាត់ជាអ្នកអភិរក្សណាចាព្រោះដោយសារតែដើមឈើឬក៏អ្នកដែលគាត់ដើមឈើដែលយើងគិតថាមានអ្នកតានៅហ្នឹងយើងអាចកាប់បានអញ្ចឹងវាមិនមែនជាព័ត៌មានដែលល្អទេប៉ុន្តែនៅតែមានមនុស្សជាច្រើននៅតែជឿថាតំបន់ដែលមានភាពត្រជាក់ត្រជុំតំបន់ដែលមានព្រៃឈើច្រើនហើយមានភាពមលុបធម្មជាតិហ្នឹងនៅតែជាតំបន់ដែលគេហៅថាតំបន់សុខស្រួលតំបន់មានភាពត្រជាក់សម្រាប់ជីវិតរស់នៅរបស់មនុស្សយើងនៅតែមានផ្នត់គំនិតហ្នឹង
Thank you. So here's our acknowledgement slide. We are grateful to many people. First of all, of course, the villagers of Kulen. Also, the Provincial Department of Environment allows us to do our research on the mountain. We also collaborate with the ADF organization. I'm very grateful to Sopat and her work with me in the field. It's very difficult to do research on religious questions. She made it a real pleasure. And we're very grateful to the Center for Khmer Studies for their support to do some research even in this difficult summer of the pandemic. Go ahead, so.
ចាអញ្ចឹង
Sopat, can you translate?
ខ្ញុំចង់មានការទទួលស្គាល់បន្តិចតាក់ទងទៅនឹងអ្នកដែលគាត់ដែលធ្វើឲ្យការស្រាវជ្រាវនេះបានមានភាពជោគរលូនគឺសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណទៅដល់អ្នកភូមិនៅក្នុងកូលែនតែម្ដងសហគមន៍អ្នកក្នុងភូមិកូលែននឹងតែម្ដងហើយទៅនឹងថ្លែងអំណរគុណដល់មន្ទីរបរិស្ថានខេត្តបុគ្គលិករបស់អង្គការ ADF ដែលគាត់ក៏បានធ្វើការនៅទីនោះហើយក៏សូមអរគុណដល់ម្ចាស់មណ្ឌលសិក្សាខ្មែរសម្រាប់ការគ្រប់គ្រងផងដែរ
And to Sopat.
នឹងសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណដល់សុភ័ក្រអូខ្ញុំភ្លេចចាសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណដល់សុភ័ក្រចា
So thank you very much for your attention, everyone. We've got about, I think, 7 minutes left. So I'm going to turn it, or 9 minutes left. I'm going to turn it back over to Sung-hee for discussion. I'm going to stop screen sharing to try to save some bandwidth. Go ahead, Sung-hee.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa, for your very interesting presentation. So all of our attendees, if you have any question, please feel free to raise your hand or write it down in the chat box. And also those who are watching us on Facebook Live, you can also write your question in the comment section below. So we will take your question to ask our speaker. So in the chat box, I received one question from Fasi. Thank you for your question. Are most spirit medium women for gender perspective? Why do you think women are often selected as spirit medium? For the three women selected, for the three women who are affected, do you think the case is different if those three women were men? Thank you.
Yeah, these are interesting questions. Thank you, Hazi. Yes, according to the research I know of in Cambodia, most spirit mediums are female across Cambodia. I don't know why. That's an interesting question. There are some male mediums, but it's more common to have men in the other Khmer ritual specialist categories than it is to have a male medium. Diviners are more often women as well. But for example, the chanting and Pali role that I talked about, that's usually a male role. Traditional healers can be male or female. Astrologers are usually male. There's a huge range of ritual specialists. I don't know why mediums are usually women. For the case we talked about, no, there's multiple stories that we weren't able to speak about where men were made sick by spirits for trespassing and they had to go through these rituals as well. So it's not the fact that they were women that meant the spirit targeted them. It's the fact that they went into their sacred area. Eli's question from earlier on, how did beliefs impact the resilience of the sociological ecological system? As I mentioned at the end of my findings, the traditional beliefs on the mountain, they don't help preserve the ecosystems on the mountain. Traditionally, however, before the war, the population on the mountain was extremely small. So revolving Swidden agriculture was a sustainable land use system. It also meant, because of these sacred beliefs, that people avoid, for example, water sources, which is great from a biodiversity perspective and an ecological perspective. It also means that traditionally people would have been careful about going near large trees and areas of dense forest. one of the main problems in the present day on the mountain is population density is not sustainable for the landscape, which is one of the reasons why Ministry of Environment has been getting increasingly strict on people clearing land for agriculture on the mountain. Yes, that's a quick answer to a very complicated question.
Can you have to summarize the answer?
Yeah, I catch up the first question better, but the second one, the question was interrupt. I will do the first question. The question from ourសំណួរ ពីអ្នកចូលរួមរបស់យើងគឺគាត់សួរថាតើភាគច្រើនអ្នកចូលរួមគឺជាស្ត្រីហើយបើភាគច្រើនគាត់ជាស្ត្រីគាត់សួរថាតើហេតុអ្វីបានជាភាគច្រើនគាត់ជាស្ត្រីហើយបើសិននៅក្នុងរឿងស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់ដែលគាត់ទទួលមានទម្លាស់ជាមួយនឹងអ្នកតានោះថាតើបើសិនជាអ្នកទាំង3នឹងជាបុរសវិញថាតើគាត់នឹងមានផលប៉ះពាល់ដូចជាពួកគាត់ដែលជាស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់ដែរឬក៏អត់អញ្ចឹងចម្លើយដែលគ្រូលីសាឆ្លើយមកគឺថាភាគច្រើននឹងហើយភាគច្រើនអ្នកចូលរួមភាគច្រើនគឺជាស្ត្រីខ្ញុំក៏មិនដឹងដែរថាហេតុអីបានជាភាគច្រើនជាស្ត្រីហើយចំពោះគ្រូឯកទេសអ្នកលើភ្នំមួយចំនួនដែលពេលខ្លះគាត់មានភេទផ្សេងគ្នាដូចជាគ្រូខ្មែរភាគច្រើនមានទាំងស្រីមានទាំងប្រុសប៉ុន្តែគ្រូដូចជាគ្រូបូលមានស្រីចាអញ្ចឹងពួកយើងឃើញមានអ្នកឯកទេសមួយចំនួនគឺមានភេទដូចគ្នាចាសំទោសភេទផ្សេងគ្នាដែរមានចាប់បានប៉ុណ្ណាបន្ទាប់មកសំណួរទី2 what is the second question?
Let's just finish.
It was interrupted.
The second part of the first question is that the spirits make sick both women and men on the mountain. Oh. Our example was just women, but we have other stories we didn't have time to tell.
ចាបន្តពីសំណួរទី1ឆ្លើយសំណួរទី1មិនខ្ញុំភ្លេចបន្ថែមអញ្ចឹងអ្នកគ្រូក៏ជួយគឺតាក់ទងទៅនឹងនៅពេលដែលគាត់សួរថាពេលដែលមានស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់ហ្នឹងឈឺបើសិនជាគាត់ជាបុរសវិញហើយគាត់មានទំនាស់បែបអញ្ចឹងថាតើគាត់នឹងមានទំនាស់ដូចស្ត្រីទាំង3ហ្នឹងដែរឬក៏អត់អញ្ចឹងមែនតើទៅទាំងស្រីទាំងប្រុសដែលមានផលប៉ះពាល់ទៅលើការទំនាស់ដីគឺសុទ្ធតែមានភាពបែរថាមានផ្ដោតទោសដូចគ្នាអញ្ចឹងបើទោះមិនថាគាត់ស្រីឬក៏ប្រុសទេគ្រាន់តែថាយើងអត់អាចយកមកនិយាយនៅក្នុងការជជែកនេះបានព្រោះដោយសារតែពេលវេលាយើងមានកំណត់ហើយយើងមានរឿងផ្សេងដែរដែលតាក់ទងទៅនឹងបុរសណាចាអញ្ចឹងយើងមានភេទទាំងពីរហ្នឹងគឺតែជាប៉ះពាល់ជាអ្នកដែលអាចប៉ះពាល់នៅការទំនាស់ដីចា
Okay, thank you. So as our time is running out, but we still have one more attendee raising hand. So I would like to invite our attendee to ask the question, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Course.
Okay, my name is Hart Foyer. I'm a former CKS senior fellow as well, so I'm glad to see such brilliant, interesting projects still being supported there. My question is about what reaches the threshold of trespass? Because you mentioned road building and clearing land for agriculture. Those seem to be obvious cases, but a woman searching for rumdeng seems to be kind of minor to me. And I've talked to many crew, some Phnom, who have mentioned that collecting medicine to heal people is not trespass. Though sometimes they also have ceremonies before they depart. So what is considered trespass? Like, how do you know, or do you only know afterwards once you're sick or afflicted?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fascinating question. When I have a chance to do more detailed analysis, I hope to get a fuller answer to that. But I didn't have time to tell the woman losing her soul story in much depth. But what was said by the villagers is that because the women had gone into a spirit sacred space, they hadn't asked permission or made any, basically they hadn't done any request rituals before they started digging in the Nekta's homeland. But what was also in the story is that the spirit actually tried to tell the women that they needed to leave. But because the spirit couldn't speak in a human voice, it was only able to make the sound of scraping, like a scraping on a clay pot. And according to the story, the spirit made the sound over and over again for a number of minutes, but none of the women understood what was happening or discussed it with each other. So the spirit cursed them after a significant period of trying to warn them to leave. So I would say in that case, it seemed that in the villagers' understanding, they might not have been made sick by the spirit if they'd responded to the warning signals from the spirit, but because they continued to trespass, didn't understand that they needed to go, in that case, they were punished. But in most cases, as you say, it's more to do with building, cultivation, or massive land reshaping in which these issues come up.
Okay. ចឹងបងខ្ញុំសូមបកស្រាយអំពីសំណួររបស់អ្នកចូលរួមរបស់យើងគាត់បានសួរថាតើយើងធ្វើមិនដឹងថាយើងកំពុងតែនៅលើដីមានទំនាស់ឬក៏មានទំនាស់ជាមួយនឹងអ្នកតាបើតាមខ្ញុំស្ដាប់រឿងដែលរបស់ស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់ដែលទៅជីករំដេងនោះគឺជាទំនាស់មួយដែលស្ដាប់ទៅដូចជារឿងស្រាលទេចុះបើទំនាស់ដែលតាក់ទងទៅនឹងការធ្វើផ្លូវផ្សេងការអភិវឌ្ឍផ្សេងនៅលើភ្នំនោះវាមានទំនាស់បែបណាទៅធ្វើម៉េចបានយើងដឹងថាកន្លែងណាមានទំនាស់កន្លែងណាមិនមានទំនាស់ចាអញ្ចឹងសម្រាប់ការបកស្រាយគឺអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំបានបកស្រាយនៅក្នុងរឿងរបស់ស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់ដែលបានទៅជីកចំដេងនោះគឺមានសញ្ញាមួយចំនួនដែលពួកគាត់បានទទួលដែរនៅក្នុងអំឡុងពេលដែលគាត់កំពុងជីករំដេងហ្នឹងដូចជាសំឡេងមួយចំនួនដូចជាការសំឡេងដូចជាការខ្វាចឬក៏ការកោសឆ្នាំងអីអញ្ចឹងគាត់ឮដែរប៉ុន្តែគាត់មិនអើពើគាត់នៅតែបន្តជីករំដេងទៀតបើតាមគាត់និយាយគាត់និយាយថាសំឡេងទាំងអស់នោះគឺជាសញ្ញានៃអ្នកតាដែលគេប្រាប់ឲ្យគាត់ឈប់ទៅគាត់រំដេងនោះប៉ុន្តែដោយសារអ្នកតាគាត់អាចនិយាយភាសាមនុស្សទេអញ្ចឹងគាត់ផ្ដល់ជាសំឡេងអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាស្ត្រីទាំង3នាក់នោះគាត់អាចបញ្ឈប់ឬក៏ការបញ្ឈប់ការជីករំដេងនោះឲ្យស្ដាប់ថាមានរឿងអីកើតឡើងឬក៏មានអ្នកតាឲ្យសញ្ញាគាត់បើសិនជាគាត់ដឹងគាត់ប្រហែលជាអាចឈប់ជីកឬក៏គាត់ទាំង3នោះអាចតាមមុននឹងគាត់ជីកអញ្ចឹងប្រហែលជាគាត់អាចជៀសផុតពីការមានទំនាស់នោះបានតែប៉ុន្តែដោយសារគាត់អត់បានសុំហើយតកតងទៅនឹងការអភិវឌ្ឍដូចជាការធ្វើផ្លូវអីផ្សេងដែលមាននៅលើហ្នឹងគឺនៅតែនៅកន្លែងហ្នឹងដូចជានៅតែមានការសុំដែរនៅពេលដែលពួកគាត់ចង់ធ្វើផ្លូវអីផ្សេងនៅលើភ្នំហ្នឹង